The panel are up there. I'm not going to read them out, except that Shane Snow has unfortunately had to go back to the department. It's glad these civil servants are working hard for us. And he's replaced by Philippe Christ of OECD. So, the first question which came up in one of the workshops is, who exactly is responsible for delivering good infrastructure, and what level of government is in charge of that? Who wants to kick off? Philippe, I think you had some ideas. The microphone works, it's on.
I should be clear, I'm replacing Shane, but I'm not speaking for DFT in any capacity. Is it on?
Pick it up. No, it's on, but you need
yes, I'm replacing Shane, but I'm not speaking for DFT in any capacity whatsoever. So please hold your questions.
Who is responsible? Certainly, municipal councils are responsible for the role of implementation, building, and in some ways the planning of cycle improvement infrastructure. But that doesn't happen in a vacuum. And I think one of the things that we can see from the Netherlands and other countries that have developed pipeline infrastructure is that there is a facilitating national framework for cycling and for cycling infrastructure in particular. Countries like Germany has a national cycle plan that is funded. Countries like Denmark are just now putting in place not only a national plan, but that also happens well. The Netherlands also has guidelines for national infrastructure networks. So there is a role in the national to give guidance, and in some cases to provide funding for what takes place at the local. But perhaps some other people is about who's specifically responsible at the local level.
I think that's definitely a good starting point, isn't it? We start with the government department, which is Department of Transport. You mentioned guidance there. I think it would be quite good if the Department of Transport would turn guidance that we've got, which is actually quite emphasizing into a standard, so that local authority engineers then have to do certain things. I think it would make it a lot easier for them as an engineer, so it's easier to control certain things and then implement them. When it comes to making cycle networks or cycle routes or strategic cycle routes, the implementation, of course, is at local authority level. We mustn't forget that. Department of Transport, they of course have to put up the money for it. Because if there's no money, there's no implementation, but it is for local authorities to then deliver it on the ground.
How does it work in Holland? Who is responsible?
It's the
authority. What about standards? One of the problems we get into this country is that virtually everything has to be very tightly defined by
standards at the national level, like guidelines, and also standards from the national level, and quality requirements from local and regional level. And at the regional level, there's definitely funding. There's national funding and local funding, and at the regional level, there's a policy about how to provide national money to the local authorities. And the national money that is provided by the regional level is very important. One important issue.
So, can I just add, obviously, it's the local authority responsibility to deliver it, but in partnership, I think, with partners in the community, ones we see here today, but also the community themselves. We have to take probably more of a step out to try to explain to people why we are changing the infrastructure and the benefits of it rather than imposing it. I think the other thing that's quite difficult for local authorities is the need to keep applying to which are short term, so it doesn't give us the opportunity really to have a plan that we can fund over a period of time, 10, 15, 20 years.
Yes, like Newcastle has got 5.7 million to spend in 18 months.
Yes.
Yes, go on, Philippe. Yeah. Can you give Philippe a microphone?
Absolutely. The short-termism of revenue or funding streams is a clear issue. But there's also a danger of reliance on revenue coming from outside of local councils and regional governments. And when you look at some countries, you see there are dedicated sources of revenue for cycling infrastructure at the regional and at the local level as well. I'll give an example in Christchurch. During the rebuilding after the earthquake, Christchurch Council was prevented from adding in cycle routes to the reconstruction because of a national rules on what could and could not be rebuilt. And so they put in place an active travel tax. Now that was not a non-controversial tax, but in the end it passed. And so now Christchurch has ensured of 30 years of steady revenue, both for the infrastructure and maintenance, not coming from the national government, but coming from their own sources. So there has to be some thinking about what will deliver a sustainable revenue stream, both for the capital building of the network and for the maintenance. And sometimes that will have to come at the council level as well.
And is that working in Christchurch?
Well, Christchurch is just now rebuilt, so they've just passed in 6 months ago the active travel tax. So they are now just building out the network on the revenue from that tax in particular.
I was just going to add to that, the sort of whether we're actually clear about the transparency at the moment about where money goes currently. You know, I think there's a lot of sort of anti-cycling rhetoric out there, but I think if the public actually knew how little was being spent on cycling per head of the population at the moment, and you know, we had a debate in one of the workshops earlier where Shane was a little bit cornered, as central government civil servants always are at these events, by him saying, well, what would you want us to do? Spend the 80 million across the whole thing. But the point is the 80 million is just too small. And local government has very little flexibility, particularly in these days of austerity, in terms of directing funds to things like cycling, or indeed to almost anything that it might see as discretionary. I think if we had a bit more transparency about where the existing money is going, you know, on road maintenance, on public transport support, on cycling and walking, then I think we might get a little bit further with that.
Okay, let's move on to the next question that emerged from the workshop, which is, and indeed from the debate, how do we deliver things more quickly and more flexibly, and in particular, how do we therefore allow people to experience the change, and then, you know, as in New York possibly, you know, then kind of decide whether they like it or not? Is there other ways of doing that? Who would like to take that? Katja, go on.
I make a start. Yeah, I think what happened in New York is quite interesting to see that the political support was there, and then there was a mayor who put in place a civil engineer for delivery of rearranging a city, largely rearranging a city away from the car towards people. And as Christian said, it was done by experimenting, by trying things out, by keeping the designs flexible, but also that then means that all the skepticism that we've got, maybe even anti-cycling kind of stuff that's going on, might just evaporate because people start to experience the city differently. I would think that is definitely a solution for Newcastle. Of course, it's not a long-term solution, but it's something where, you know, you could start to rearrange space, maybe just by, you know, traffic corning something off, and just to see how it could be done differently, how it could be experienced differently, how people would then start to use it differently. Definitely the way to go, and it doesn't cost much, and you would get the public support that way, I think.
A clear example, very close to what we have seen today, yesterday in the workshop. The Netherlands, Amsterdam had a very wide roundabout. It was an accident place, and they knew already that it would have to be smaller, so they put in, but they didn't have the money yet, and the planning was not there, so they just put in these little strips of rubber where you cannot drive over. It was not the prettiest thing to see, but now it was there for 5 years, and now it's made permanent. But things like that could be experimented here. And it's not so costly.
I was going to say that Sustrans is delivering some do-it-yourself streets in Newcastle as part of the City Cycle Ambition Fund, which enables local people to experiment how they would like the street to be, how they would like the traffic to go, and they actually do a kind of a planning for real. So they use all kind of material like hay bales to see how actually you physically get round these corners that you're trying to do. I also think that I suspect that as we go through the afternoon, I'm going to be the Jonah of the panel, because again, I'm going to come back to what you were saying earlier, is about we're in times of austerity. Newcastle City Council is losing £110 million from its budget over 3 years. We have to manage the messages that we're delivering to communities, and they're suffering from cuts in various services. We have to be really careful that we don't look as though we're being kind of frivolous about trying things in a local area, and they're saying, why are you spending, we've already had criticism, why are you spending £5.7 million on cycling infrastructure when you're cutting services? And it's quite a difficult conversation to have about the complexities of local government finance. So part of this is around communicating better and managing the message better, and constantly talking about the benefits of what we're trying to do, not just to the cyclist but to the city. This is about really how we want to live in our city now and in the future, and that's the kind of message that we have to get across.
Okay, Philippe.
Can I just, is it? No. And can I just say that there's a tremendous amount of imagination out there. People have incredible ideas about what to do with their streets, in front of their houses, in front of their shops. And when you allow them to develop this imagination, to concretely put down some of the ideas, then you find a lot of ownership of what happens afterwards. And so one of the ways to get around the opposition sometimes that you see from top-down programs is to allow people to guide the development of their cycling facilities, of their streets, of their shopping spaces. And so that is one way to get around this issue, to buy ownership for the people by allowing them to participate in the planning process.
Okay. Which brings it on nicely to it was mentioned, you know, that Holland had a national plan that people had France particularly required every country to, every town and city to draw up a national, a local plan. How could we get a plan for every city in the UK? I mean, you know, how could that be delivered? And is it deliverable within the context of localism? I mean, that's a big question. Yeah, Katja. Yeah.
I think to get Newcastle, for example, has a cycling strategy, and it is a good one. Other cities may not have, but I think it comes back to that relationship with the Department for Transport and local authorities. I think Cycling in England is gone. Cycling in England was good. You know, there was a lot of steer coming out, a lot of messages coming out of Cycling England as to what should happen on a national level, on a local level, and how all that works together. That's gone now, and I think with a national cycling strategy or national cycle plan, whatever you want to call it, you know, a clear message from the Department for Transport for a way forward for cycling would probably help to draw that responsibility down onto a local level, and then start for local authorities, councils to set up their cycling strategy coming off that logically from a national plan.
But Helen, is there not a contradiction there, which actually brings me on to the next question, which is, you know, David Cameron set out, Marion, set out a cycling vision. He wants more people cycling more often and whatever, and yet there's kind of no structure within which to do that, is there? I mean, is that not what you're struggling with in Newcastle? You know, there's no kind of set objectives, really, is there?
David Cameron's vision for cycling is very good, but without the political leadership at government level, without a national plan, I don't know how it can be delivered. Because one of the discussions we had in the workshop this morning was around the competitive nature of bidding for pots of money to do things in a city like a Newcastle, so 5.7 million for Newcastle, but actually people cycle from Newcastle to North Tyneside and to Sunderland and to South Tyneside. So the other areas in Tyne and Wear haven't got that amount of money to help them deliver and their own cycling plan. So one of the ways we want to be working is that there has been established in this area the combined authority. So Tyne and Wear and Northumberland and Durham form a combined authority, one of which his responsibilities is transport. So we want to work, which is why people are here today, we want to work across the sub-region to make sure that we're actually providing infrastructure that doesn't stop at the boundary of Newcastle, because we're thinking about how people get to work, we're thinking about the economy, we're thinking about public health, we're thinking about all the issues to do with cycling. And what we've spoken about so far, I've really all been around the Department of Transport. We maybe need to think much more widely about the benefits of cycling and look to other funding streams, say public health, to help us deliver the kind of outcomes we want for our city.
Adding to this, the bicycle policy in the Netherlands started at bottom. It wasn't a national policy, it started in cities, and they set good examples. And there was, on a national level, there was, after a while, there was a national policy, but they were still depending on the local level and the local experience. That's a pity that Cycling England is gone, because there you can have the exchange of ideas and good examples and things like that. And like Marianne is saying, the regional level is very important, especially if you see in Newcastle, where actually half of the city is not part of the city. South of the Tyne is not part of the city, but it's part of the city, of course. Yeah. No, but it's part of what people would experience as a city. And so the regional level is very good, and maybe that also, if it's not coming from the national government directly, but there are opportunities to get it from the local level, or even better, on a regional level, try to find where you can get your opportunities, and then maybe in a larger group of cities, regions, can plead at a national level. But it's find the opportunities that are there, and as long as they are not at national level, the local level has to make do. But
Jeff?
I was just conscious that nobody answered your question about localism, so I thought somebody better, and I'll have a go.
I'm a journalist, I'm used to it.
It was a rejoinder. I actually do think localism provides a bit of an opportunity. I know a lot of us are very cynical about it, and I think there's a lot of cynicism about the agenda in central government. What localism potentially does is forces people's attention onto the conditions of their local neighbourhood, and I think generally when forced into doing that, they often start to square up to a lot of questions that they haven't thought about very much before. So a lot of their knee-jerk reactions about, we had a question actually in the morning about how do you kind of unhook people from their knee-jerk reactions, like more congestion means more roads. I think localism potentially provides the tools with which communities might engage in those questions in a deeper way, and so get beyond some of those roads equals jobs, parking spaces outside my shop equal, the benefit, lots of economic benefit. So I think in potentially, although the localism agenda is only really having traction in particular places, and generally the sort of wealthier, more rural communities, I think that there is a potential for localism through tools like neighbourhood planning to actually facilitate a greater discussion. And transport is specifically, doing local transport studies is specifically one of the tools mentioned in the Localism Act. So there is the potential to do that, and there is actually resource that communities can get perhaps to do some of this DIY stuff through that.
No?
Yes, sorry I didn't answer the question. Localism is really important to us in Newcastle. We are working very closely with communities, and we want to, as far as possible, devolve power and resources and assets at the community level. And we're looking at assets not just being buildings, but actually people. So we're working very closely, and there's lots of examples of devolution going on in Newcastle. So we're keen on it, and we support it, and we're trying to promote it. But it's quite difficult when I think we've probably got one of the most centrist governments that we've ever had. So they espouse localism, but then they give us top-down planning rules that we have to adhere to, which really have nothing to do with how people in local neighbourhoods feel, and they get ridden roughshod over. And we're trying to explain, actually, we have to follow this because this is government planning legislation. It is not ours, not what we want to do. So I think the government could help, by defining what it means by localism and actually giving power to local authorities who are elected representatives from local communities and who are spending the money locally and know better, I think, how to spend it with their communities than central government does.
But there is a rather delicious contradiction there, isn't there? Because, as you hinted, if you had been given £5.7 million to spend as you wanted, the local people probably would not want it spent on cycling. So, and similarly, you might go to an area and say, we've got £500,000 to spend on this cycle route, and they'll say, no, we don't want these bloody bicycles here, you know, we want kind of an improved access road or whatever. So how do you deal with that?
Why do I get the difficult ones?
Because you're a politician.
Oh, right. No, not really. You're probably right. If we'd just said we're using 5.7 million of our City Council's budget on cycling, there would have been an outcry. However, we're trying to work, and we are working with local communities at the local level to try to think about what kind of city do you want to live in? What kind of city do you want your children to grow up in? Do you want access to services? Do you want to be able to get there quickly? Do you want cars on the street? We have, I think as we said in one of the workshops, we have instituted 20-mile-an-hour speed limits in all our residential streets in the city. Not, but I think as politicians, sometimes you have to be on. You have to take decisions because that's what you're elected to do. You're elected to lead the city. You're elected to think about what's best for all, not just what's best for the individual who may want to park outside their front door.
Good answer, good answer. Right.
Making political decisions is always risky and always entails some form of opposition. But when you look at what's happened, when you talk about these type of decisions, investing in bicycle infrastructure, the evidence shows that that is almost always a winning strategy. And so early movers, let's say Newcastle, who are able to put through these strategies and implement these networks, will have an advantage over other cities that don't do that. And unfortunately, there is no uniform development of urban areas over an entire country. There are early movers, and there are latecomers, and then there are those that are dropped off. The key is not to be in that latter category. The key is to be in the first two categories. And so from what I see in Newcastle, there's a real willingness to be at the forefront of that first category. And that is where the political risk is, but that's where the political payoff is as well.
Katja, go on.
Yeah, I think it's all, I think we've said it quite a few times now, it's all in the communication as well, how you ask the question and what questions you ask. The Cycle City Ambition Fund is actually not solely a cycling bid. It's got a heck of a lot of walking in it as well. And once you combine cycling and walking, you get a better city. So, you know, that is the overall message. And we've got almost 6 million to do it, so that's great. And I think another message which we should really urgently send is that providing for the car and continued car use is really, really expensive to the city. And we cannot go on like that.
Okay. Okay, which brings us again nicely on to the penultimate question: is how do we get engineers, highway engineers and the like, interested in the public health agenda, which is actually a big part of why we should encourage cycling? How do we combine the two, particularly now that that's a local issue? Go on, Philippe.
So very quickly, engineers like tools, and so you give them a tool. And there is a tool to look at how do you integrate the physical activity aspects of cycling infrastructure in appraisal. And there are tools at the national level, and there are tools at the international level. In fact, the World Health Organization has a tool called HEAT, which is available to cities freely and modifiable. All the parameters can be modified, and it allows engineers to understand what is the impact on health of their policies in relation to cycling and pedestrian facilities. So give them a tool. The tool exists, it's used around the world, and it's used in parts of the UK.
I think this is about political leadership and being absolutely clear about what you want to do in your city and how you implement that. As Katja mentioned, the City Cycle Ambition Fund is not just about cycling, it includes walking. we've got an active travel centre, we've got do-it-yourself streets, we've got a retail streets well, and as the bid contributed approximately £800,000 of matched funding, and we know that the determinant of good health is good housing and a good job. So it's incredibly important to put those ideas forward, and I think we're taking presentation to the Wellbeing for Life Board, which sits over Newcastle, which is about how do we improve the health of people in the city, particularly those in the most deprived communities where we know that poverty and health are factors. And we have a whole range of things that we're trying to do, which is around community champions for health, community champions for cycling, community champions for walking. And I think it's about having a strategic approach and a whole council approach to this, so that actually you work with your engineers and you say, this is what we're trying to achieve, these are the outcomes that we want, how can you help us deliver them?
I'm speaking as an engineer here myself. I absolutely support that, Philippe. It is about tools. Engineers like a system that they can use, and sometimes it's just to spark discussions, and you can then have a debate around things, but a system, a tool is usually a good thing. Another thing that really helps engineers is seniority, signing up to what they're doing. So whenever you're designing something that your boss says, I like that, whatever happens next, I'll definitely support you in that. And I think if we translate that into the council, it's really important that we get the political leadership there as well, but also the support of the council directors. And I have to say that for the attendance today, it was absolutely fantastic to see Nick Forbes, but cabinet councillors weren't here, and council directors didn't turn up either.
Yes, go on, Marion.
I think that's quite unfair, actually. I think we have a cabinet of 6, many of whom have full-time jobs, many of whom have apologised. We've had people popping in and out as they could. The chief executive has had considerable things to do today, but is very supportive of this. And I think we are sitting in Newcastle Civic Centre, celebrating the fact that we've won a successful bid to spend money, inviting people from Tyne and Wear, Northumberland and Durham to implement that bid. So I think we can say the political will is there. Not everybody has to be in the room at the same time to demonstrate it.
Okay, before we get mired in too much controversy, it brings us again onto the last question which Katya put out, which I think is a good question, is the long-term objective of today. What's the next step? Where do we go from here? Matt.
I think back to the 1970s, 1980s in the Netherlands. There were first big demonstrations for better livability, and then some examples. And I would love to see if one good example would be elaborated here, to really show their cycling have the attention of the city. Cycling is there. We give space to cyclists, and once it will be there.
One quick win.
Not necessarily. Maybe not necessarily quick. Some quick wins, but make something good. Yes. A signature, an iconic thing. Yeah.
Right. No.
Yeah. Thank you. One of the things I picked up from one of the officers who worked for the city is that he found it really useful just kind of earwigging what other people were saying. So there's something about creating an opportunity for the sharing of best practice, the sharing of ideas, because we've lost that with Cycle England. I was going to say even if it's only the city cycle bid, but that wouldn't be fair. How do we make sure that we carry on this kind of dialogue with people across the region, with engineers, with planners, and widen it out to include the public health agenda and other issues?
Jeff?
I think I'd just hammer home the sort of participatory message, but also how getting people in a genuine dialogue requires quite a lot of skills, and those don't necessarily reside in the people responsible for doing transport policy. So you do need a coordinated approach across a local authority. I think what Sustrans do in this field is superb. And if what you want really, I suppose, is to create those arenas where you can actually explain to people and what some of Philippe's evidence about actually what the impact of things such as cycle highways will be on their business. And to do that, you need to first create the arenas in the first place. I think you could learn a lot from the community development field and the planning field, where participatory methods are long since been practiced and pursued and evaluated. So, one of the lessons from that, for example, is to use change agents. So if you want to do something radical on Gosforth High Street, talk to the landlords, talk to the owners of the cafes. They're the ones who could be your opposition, but they could also be the people who will convince others that actually what you're doing is very sensible. But you need to take good evidence to them and spend some time and convince them almost on a sort of one-to-one basis. And those kind of lessons, I think, are the important ones if we're going to communicate some of the messages that we all kind of sign up to. But we're not necessarily the right people to go and try and sort of do that work in the community.
Okay. No, Gordon, you want to say one last thing? One last thing, because
I definitely, absolutely agree with Mayo Line on an iconic route. I think that would be a very good thing to do, and I think that if it's built right and it attracts, when it attracts new customers to it, cyclists on it, then that will certainly show something, and it will help the city council to promote that message then as well. But what I have to say, I got a very good message today, or got very good feel about the Department for Transport, and that they are very much more up for discussion. So hopefully we don't see them anymore as a sort of group in the clouds, but maybe form almost, on a weekly kind of basis, a bit more of a conversation with them. I think they're less scary than engineers actually make out, and I think today that's one of the things that has really changed for me.
Okay, well, perfect timing. I will just spend a couple of minutes summing up, and then we'll call it a wrap, as they say in the film industry. I must say this has been fascinating, inspiring, lots of fantastic presentations. And in terms of Newcastle, there's some very good news, right? You've got £5.7 million to spend in 18 months. And okay, there's a downside to that, but there's also a plus side to that, which is that it clearly opens the way for innovative solutions, participation with people, new ideas, and doing something emblematic, which I think is very, so it's got to be something, something that comes out of this. And the politicians have to buy into this, because if this 5.7 million is frittered away in a bit of blue paint and a lot of consultation, they're not going to look good out of it. So everybody has to buy into this, and I think that is a real positive. On a slight downside, I went for a run this morning along the waterfront, and also had a wander round with Claire Prosper yesterday around the city centre, and walked here, and there is quite a long way to go. And I think that what is needed is some overall thinking about what the city centre is about, where you could begin to say, well, we don't really want parked cars there, we don't really want this little alleyway to be used by cars, it could be closed off and pedestrianised, and cafes could come out, or whatever. The waterfront is absolutely fantastic, right? And clearly, it has been the result of a lot of investment, and is a step change. I mean, I first came to Newcastle probably 20 years ago, and it's completely different from that. But leading up from the waterfront, for example, is already quite kind of difficult and not very friendly for for pedestrians, and could really do with some kind of thought as to how to improve what is a fantastic tourist area, what we're really enormous kind of economic potential. And that's something I've taken away from today's conference, and I think should be emphasized, which is that cycling is not about cycling, right? It's a part of a wide range of strategies and important factors that determine the success or failure of a town. And it's an important component. It can be a tool, a catalyst, but it's not only about the benefits for cyclists, it's about the benefits overall, it's about economic benefits, it's about health benefits. I was talking at lunch to a doctor who was emphasizing to me just how many diseases result from insufficient exercise. And it's not just heart disease and respiratory diseases and the like. It's a whole range of conditions, from Alzheimer's to multiple sclerosis to all sorts of other diseases where exercise would kind of make a difference. So this is part of a fantastically wide agenda over urban planning, over health, over the economics, which Philippe kind of emphasized, of a whole range of issues. So I think the message to take away from this, the message to take away is that cycling is not just about transport or cycling or whatever. It's about being a change agent for the whole city. And I think Newcastle, with it, the money it's got to spend, it's got a fantastic opportunity. I hope maybe I'll come back in 18 months' time here and see something really emblematic, things that have changed and make a real difference, and lots more people cycling, not just at 6 o'clock in the morning when I was jogging, but all day long. So thank you very much for an inspiring conference. Thanks to the organisers, Newcastle City Council, the Dutch involvement, the conference organisers, and so everybody who's been involved. I think it's a fantastic, successful day. You're nearly all there. Very few people wandered off, which is always a good sign of a good conference. I think this is the start of something, not the end of something. So thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed the day and have a safe journey home. Thank you.